Hillary Clinton said this about the Mueller report in a Washington Post op-ed, quote, Mueller's report is a roadmap to potential impeachment or not, warning not to rush to judgment like Republicans did against her husband in 1998. Hillary went out as far to compare the Mueller probe to Watergate and asked for a 9/11 type commission to look into President Trump. Let's bring in the man who investigated the Clintons for Whitewater corruption. He's been observing them for years. He's former Whitewater independent counsel Robert Ray. Great to see you, Robert.
Great. Good afternoon. Nice to be with you.
Nice to see you, too. What's your reaction to all of this?
She makes some fair points about the interest in having a bipartisan, fair and thorough investigation. That's, of course, what we had with the Mueller probe. Now that that's completed, I guess the question is, where do we go from here? She's suggesting, roadmap to impeachment. The real question is, what will House Democrats do, and specifically, what will the House Judiciary Committee do? And it's not clear that they've made up their mind what their intentions are regarding this. She's making a big push in the political realm to suggest that public hearings are the answer to all of this. But, much of what she says in the letter is really just a partisan political attack on suggesting that really what Americans should fear as the result of supposedly the Russians' assault on our government is the assault that Donald Trump represents, in her view, to the ongoing processes of American government. So it's a little unclear. It's a mixed message, and she's using one against the other. If we really were concerned about Russian penetration into our electoral process, a bipartisan commission makes a lot of sense. That has its own independent merit. If, on the other hand, what we're talking about is an impeachment proceeding, then Democrats need to say that. And finally, though, if what this is really about is to just have public hearings for the purpose of doing damage to the president and the political process, you can understand why the president would be resistant to cooperating with that.
So you're not buying when she says this is about a fair probe into what happened, because it won't be fair, because it's the Democrats doing it, right? And would she?
Well, just to give you a few examples, I mean, she's talking about Watergate as the paradigm, right? Fair, thorough, bipartisan, much of which it was. But, for example, she extols the virtues of the person who led it, John Doerr, who was a Republican. Okay?
Right, well, let me back up. I hear what you're saying, but should she have said, we'll wait for the IG probe into how this whole Russia-Trump collusion story started, which was started by the Steele file, which do you think, should she have said that, said wait for the IG probe for the Justice Department to finish and then do it, and then be honest and talk about the Steele file, which was paid for by her campaign and the DNC, and whether that was a distraction away from the Clinton Foundation problem? Do you think that was a distraction? Was that a ploy to distract from Clinton Foundation troubles?
I think the letter was, remarkable in what it didn't say. I mean, on the one hand, it said it was that we should have an appeal to bipartisanship. But of course, if it were really bipartisan, we would get into the origins of the Steele dossier and the origins of the Russia collusion investigation, which, obviously, for her own reasons, she wants to steer a million miles away from that, and because it opens up a whole bunch of things.
Was the Steele dossier a ploy to distract from the Clinton Foundation malfeasance?
I don't know. We don't know what that particular issue is. But
you've observed them for years. Do you feel like that's something the Clintons could have done?
I think the Steele dossier, the important aspect of that is the fact that the Clinton campaign was behind it, and the fact that the Obama Justice Department was aware of that fact, and somehow or another that particular fact didn't make its way into the FISA court application, which is a major problem, one that the Attorney General has signaled is already a big deal and that he intends to look at. And again, your other point, which is, if you were truly going to be bipartisan about this, you would wait for the Inspector General's report, because that's going to address the origins of the Russia collusion investigation. There's going to be follow-up with regard to that, as the Attorney General has already indicated, at the Justice Department, and Congress appropriately should have a role to play there. Again, if you were truly interested in being fair, bipartisan, and thorough, the Steele dossier would be part of a House Judiciary Committee investigation.
As an investigator, and you've observed the Clinton for years, do you feel like the government or the probes got to the bottom of what happened at the Clinton Foundation?
I don't. It may well be that ship has passed. But what's interesting about this is it doesn't appear that the Attorney General is prepared to let go of it. First significant fact. And the second thing is, I think we're going to learn a lot more than we realize when we see the Inspector General's report about what was going on behind the scenes relative to the origins of what became the Russia collusion investigation.
Will you come back on the show and talk to us about it?
Of course.
That was terrific analysis.
So I think we're going to be there in May. We're not far away. We're almost to May. By May, or the end of May or into June, we'll have the benefit of that. We'll find out whether House Democrats are really serious about looking into that also.
You just gave some great insights and perspective and context.
Nice to be with you, Liz.
Democrats adopting some dire messaging in the wake of Robert Mueller's report, which did not go their way, insisting still that the president poses a threat to American values anyway. Watch this.
I fear that Mr. Trump does have designs on becoming what the founders and the writers of the Constitution most feared, and that's a tyrant in our country.
This is about what is going on today and the threats to our next election, to our defense as a nation.
We give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House. He will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation.
Well, that first person was William Weld, not a Democrat. He's running against the president, in fact, on the Republican side. But here now is Utah Senator Mike Lee, author of the brand new book, Our Lost Declaration, America's Fight Against Tyranny, from King George to the Deep State. Senator, good to have you with us this evening.
Thank you.
You know, you hear these sort of grand, dire proclamations about the fact that the president is undermining American values and literally that the country itself is in deep danger if he continues to be president. What do you make of that? And what do you think it is, what's the underlying evidence that you see playing out in the country now of that?
I think they're engaging in paranoid fantasy. Look, there isn't a single shred of truth to what they're saying. The real threat to liberty in this country relates to the power that's been excessively delegated by the people's elected lawmakers in Congress over to the executive branch. Yes, there's too much power in the executive branch. That is not Trump's fault. This was true decades before Donald Trump ever came down on that escalator. This is not his problem. It's Congress's problem. It's one of the reasons I wrote this book, Our Lost Declaration, was to remind the American people that we fought a revolution in order to disaggregate power, in order to put it back in the hands of the people. But this is not a threat to liberty by Donald Trump. It's a threat created by Congress.
Well, give me some examples of where you think the executive branch has too much power and you find that to be dangerous.
Over the course of many decades, about the last 80 years, we've seen a gradual shift of power from lawmaking power and the issuance of federal regulations costing the economy $2 trillion a year to war-making power, emergency power. All of these things have been delegated away by Congress, sometimes by an express act of Congress, in other cases by inaction by Congress in response to executive action. But in every circumstance, this is a result of Congress's failure, not Donald Trump's. These people are wrong to say that Donald Trump is a threat to liberty. Congress is the problem.
Well, when you look at liberty, you look at the justice system, you look at opportunity in America, basic freedoms in America, have any of those things been undercut either by the president? I mean, is anybody less free or more constricted in their lives and their abilities and the American way now than they were when the president was elected? And if so, are any of those things due to the executive power that you see that has been, collected unjustly?
No, I don't believe so. If anything, I believe the American people have more freedom today than they did the day before President Trump was sworn into office. One of the reasons for that is when we look at the fact that this is an administration that in every instance has taken out at least 2 regulations for every new regulation it's issued. This president has done more to restore liberty than any president in recent history. We should be grateful for that. And we should, again, point the finger back at Congress for the fact that Congress has relinquished power.
So one of the things that people point to is what they call the admiration, the apparent admiration that the president has for leaders like Putin and Kim Jong-un. We just saw the two of them meet today in a historic meeting, actually. Russia, China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. Do you think that that is true, A? And if it is true, do you think that that undercuts American values, what he has said about those leaders?
I don't think that a president being willing to engage in an open dialogue with foreign leaders represents a threat to our liberty. Quite to the contrary, I think it's to be praised when a president wants to reach out and wants to make sure that he doesn't insult foreign leaders. And we shouldn't be denigrating him for trying to do that, for trying to make our foreign relations better.
Here's a piece of sound from Bernie Sanders talking about that, because we're going to hear a lot about this in the upcoming campaign. Watch.
The very concept of democracy is under attack by a president who seems intent on emulating the authoritarian leaders in Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, and elsewhere.
I mean, when you look at some of those examples that he gives, and we all know that there have been moments when the president has been more complimentary than we've heard in the past of some of the leaders of these countries. And, you know, it appears that most of the reason for that is kind of opening the door to have some discussions, some negotiations. And we've seen that kind of, those kind of comments on presidents in the past when they wanted to do similar things, whether it be with Iran or other countries. But have we seen the president try to emulate the kinds of power that those leaders have in those countries?
Not at all. I can't think of a single example of where he has done that. Now, when he mentions Saudi Arabia, perhaps Senator Sanders is referring to the fact that we are fighting a war as co-belligerents in support of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. It's a war that hasn't been declared. That war, I would remind Senator Sanders, was started by President Obama. He got us into this. President Trump hasn't gotten us out of that. But there again, this is an example of Congress relinquishing its power. It's supposed to be Congress that declares war, and it's a shame that Congress doesn't exercise this power anymore. It's one of the reasons why I wrote our Lost Declaration. I want to reconnect the American people with this basic notion of civics, with the notion that part of the reason why we had a revolution in the first place was to put power back in the hands of the people, because it had been abused in the hands of King George III and his predecessors.
Senator, thank you very much. Our Lost Declaration, America's Fight Against Tyranny from King George to the Deep State. Good to talk to you tonight, sir. Thank you.